flying through by way of Paris, but just for a couple nights.
Do you want to present about it? You got
Upper
a whole
Norway.
wrapped audience.
We're leaving
Are you watching?
northern Norway on a cruise to the Arctic.
Hi.
9 nights.
Yeah, and I got
Always wanted to
say.
The closest I've been, I went to the northwest of Iceland that has some fjords. I don't think they're quite on the scale of Norway. I've never seen anything like that. The scale of it. That's gonna be great.
We've done Antarctica twice,
Oh wow.
so it's time to do the other end of the world.
You know, I'm very good at carrying luggage. Great conversationalist. Just gonna throw that out there.
My husband David, this is, I can't remember your
Hi.
first name.
David.
David Gruch. His mom Carol bought a house.
Yeah, you have to move out soon too.
Yeah.
I feel like you've been nice about this.
It's okay. She can pay for the lawn mowing.
Anita Junior, step up.
Brooke just told me she's out of practice today.
She's driving. This morning when she told me she was driving to school, no, it's coming with me.
Shouldn't be a problem.
They see what you did there.
She reminds me of the Friday. She emails me.
And that's like, and am I starting on
Are you
tomorrow?
seeing?
And yeah, I went here earlier and I went, oh yeah.
I'll set an expectation very low, and I'm prepared to be surprised.
You didn't say vector. You didn't say vector. That was a private conversation amongst adults.
On camera.
What, speaking of for adults, what are you reading here?
This is the next product. Until they've given us a cool 2 blocks to the condo.
Kind of looks like he used a photocopier.
Well, yeah, when you Beatles voice just cuts right through everything. It wouldn't have lasted long than 5 minutes.
I meant to do so. I had a joke about Lincoln.
Hey, congratulations on Nick's. About time. I was actually reading. I was being happy. Yeah, that's recording.
He's gonna be over here momentarily. Did it move a little bit? Better? Is that all in frame?
You can see it.
Okay. Thank you. Can you see the back of my head? Comb my hair for nothing.
The microaggression. We talked about this.
Nick, will you do the names?
I'm in the box.
Oh, you're in the box. Oh, okay, can you go old school with it?
Oh.
I know, it's a crazy idea, right? Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Christina Birnbach. I'm the 9th and 10th grade academic dean and the chair of the English department here at Watkinson. I also have the lovely good fortune this year to be Nick Cooper's advisor. I am leading this exhibition today because Nick's senior STEM teacher, Mara Hensey, has been in mitigating circumstances the last couple of days, so we just did a little shifting around for the benefit of Nick's process. So what you're going to see is Nick present on the work that he's done this year in senior seminar. Once he's finished presenting, once I present, then he'll present, then we'll open it up to questions from the panel, and then we'll open it up after that to questions from the whole group. So we all sort of have a similar starting point. I'm going to read sort of a frame of what we do in senior STEM and what we should be expecting from this exhibition. But before I do that, why don't the panel please turn and introduce yourselves to the audience.
Hi everybody, I'm Tom Gromack. I am the one of the IT people here at Watkinson, and so I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm Abby. I'm a junior at Watkinson, and I have the honor of being the last-minute elected
Pinch hitting.
junior.
Pinch hitting. Awesome.
I'm Thomas Cothy. I'm an upper school English teacher.
And I'm Mara Hensey. I'm in the college counseling office, and I'm Nik C senior STEM teacher.
So Senior Seminar is a credit-bearing required class and serves as a built-in structure to prompt, support, and challenge each senior to accomplish meaningful and important work as a capstone to their high school education. The course stresses the importance of strong individual effort, including self-advocacy, resilience, and the value of critical friendship and collaboration. Each student develops the primary areas of interest for the senior project, narrows these ideas towards a topic, and articulates an essential question. All of this guides them toward their final senior project, which they submitted a few weeks ago. This presentation is designed to exhibit and explicate the student's process and learning over the course of the year. Ready?
Hi everyone, I'm Nick Cooper, and welcome to my exhibition, Life and Learning in the Digital Age. I'd like to start by asking you some questions to keep in the back of your mind. When you wake up, what is the first thing you look at before you go to sleep? When was the last time you went somewhere without your phone? The last time you struck up a conversation with a stranger? When was the last time you sat and did nothing? I bet there's also a few questions you have for me. Like, why am I looking at a flip chart? Obviously, my project looks a little different than most. I'll warn you now, these pages are messy. Some are crooked, ink smudged, there's strange spacing. For reasons that I hope will become abundantly clear to you today, it was an important and intentional choice in the era of hyper-sleek, ultra-perfect slideshow presentations. For the brave among you, you may be wondering why your phones are in boxes. That will, I promise, be explained in time. But for now, allow me to backtrack. I have not always led the life that some would describe as neo-Luddite. I have made many a Google Slides presentation, and I was a smartphone user for 3 years. The summer before 11th grade, however, I had a reckoning. My father and I were staying in Berlin, Germany for a month and a half. It was only my second time out of America, and I knew it was going to be an amazing opportunity. But something wasn't right, I realized soon after arriving. Being in a new, exciting place forced me to confront my tech habits. It was one thing in Hartford, but if I was in one of the most bustling, colorful cities in the world, why was I spending hours every day staring at my phone? As soon as I became conscious of my habits, it was as if a mental dam had broken and I could not return to my prior state of ignorance. I was deeply aware of the compulsive way I checked my phone, iMessage, TikTok. Whenever there was a spare moment of time, I pulled out my phone without thinking. My father, one day, suggested we spend a phone-free afternoon out on the town. The thought made my stomach churn uncontrollably. After protest and an argument, I consented, but I couldn't bear the prospect and snuck the phone with me in a bag, checking it in the bathroom every time we went inside. Even then, I was aware that this was bizarre behavior, and I was humiliated privately. I felt like an addict, and I felt melodramatic for thinking that. But the thought of truly leaving behind my phone left me nauseous. A week after I got back to the US, I bought a flip phone. Throughout junior year, I hovered on the precipice, using both smartphone and flip phone. By senior year, I'd had enough. I got rid of my iPhone for good last August and have only used a flip phone since. The changes I witnessed within myself were mind-blowing. My attention span for extended reading skyrocketed. Days felt longer. I've slept better. I found it easier to write. But I wondered exactly why this was. I began to become an all-consuming focus. And so it seemed a fitting topic for my senior project. And so, my awful initial essential question was born. How did technology so quietly and rapidly take over virtually every aspect of our lives? What has this done to the human mind, and where are we headed? Remarkable only for its torturous length. This behemoth of a question is representative of more general issues towards the beginning of my process. Did I maybe agree that my question was too long, confusing, and broad? Only grudgingly. I had a fixed idea of what my project was going to look like, and I was hardly open to input. Did I want to start the search for a mentor? No thanks. I announced that my mentor was going to be the town of Green Bank, West Virginia, small southern town that has no cell service due to its close proximity to a massive solar telescope. Without doing enough research to realize that 90% of the residents of the town either A, had an illicit phone, or B, were hypochondriacs who believe that they have an allergy to EMF radiation, known as electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Though funny in retrospect, my rigidity at this point in the process was troublesome. I can be quite stubborn, and it was not until later in the process that I was able to open my mind, accept input from others, and arrive at the final, improved version of my essential question. What do we lose in a digital world? Allow me to clarify. When I say digital world, I'm not referring to some dystopian virtual reality-based future. I mean the world as it is today. One in which the predominant forms of communication, education, and recreation take place on a digital landscape. As I began researching, I struggled to blend the scientific and more cultural, anthropological approaches to the topic. But a few key sources helped me maintain a healthy balance between the two. On the cultural end of the spectrum, a 1993 article by the late author and essayist David Foster Wallace, titled E Unibus Plurum on U.S. Television and Fiction, proved to be a strong source. Though written before the smartphone era, it is eerily prophetic, as Foster Wallace gives a detailed description of the ethos of American culture and consumerism, our preoccupation with the delusions of celebrity, the dangers of television as a medium which primarily engages without demanding, the cycle of television's presentation of an idealized life, our subsequent disappointment when our own lives don't meet its standard, and our return to television to get another fix of the dream life, which Wallace describes as a malignant addiction, because the perceived solution to the issue is to return to the source of the problem, which furthers the problem itself. It's all speculative social commentary, of course. Behavioral addictions like gambling, overeating, smartphone, and television use are contested by some, unlike explicit drug addictions. Still, Wallace's essay was the most comprehensive social breakdown of the technological effects on human interaction that I had yet found. I was able to find more scientific balances to Wallace's essay in my other two best sources, a book called The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr, and iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood by generational psychologist Jean Twenge. These two books served as the main two jumping-off points as I explored what we really lose, and found the question easiest to approach categorically. So what do we lose as adolescents? The most accurate way to chart changes generationally is to compare results from high school censuses and surveys, which have polled students in America since the 1960s and provide more stable data than one-off, one-time surveys. They also have the distinct strength of ensuring that the general U.S. population is represented in terms of gender, race, and socioeconomic class. All facts I'm about to relay cross all usual social divisions. They are almost fully universal issues among adolescents of every background. So that being said, one can begin to answer the question of what is lost in more concrete ways. Teenagers today are less likely to go out without their parents, to date, to have sex, to have teenage pregnancies, to have a driver's license, to have a job, to try alcohol, to attend parties, to get together with friends, to kill each other, meaning the teen homicide rate has dropped substantially, to take risks, or to like trying dangerous things. The tradition of teenage years as a reckless time is bygone, so teens are safer. Maybe it's false nostalgia for an outdated conception of the teenage experience to expect risk-taking. Maybe that should be done away with, and the new version of teenagehood, one that is spent predominantly online, one in which teens are tracked and out of harm's way, should be embraced with open arms. Except it's not that simple. It's accompanied by a new slew of danger, a more elusive and insidious kind, ones that have moved from the straightforward old dangers of teenage raucousness to psychological dangers. Teens today are more likely to feel left out or lonely, exhibit symptoms of depression and anxiety, to feel overwhelmed by life, to get less than 7 hours of sleep a night, and to commit suicide. Some have tried to argue that these changing rates reflect not a change in the actual mental health of adolescents, but rather a normalization of mental struggles culturally that would allow teens to feel comfortable admitting to emotional vulnerability that they might have tried to cover up in, say, 1975. But this theory does not align with the data. In the 90s and 2000s, when therapeutic culture was largely accepted in the mainstream, the rates of suicide and depressive symptoms were on the decline. But beginning in the later 2000s and exploding in 2012, the statistics changed. And not solely for mental health, for all the other changes I laid out earlier. 2012 looks like a ski slope on the charts. The significance of this? 2012 is the year that the percentage of Americans owning a smartphone crossed above 50%. That percentage has gone up steadily since, and these issues have correlatingly gotten worse. The devices that claim to connect people have had the opposite effect. They have isolated users, and this is profoundly detrimental to the well-being of adolescents. The data could not be more clear. Teens who spend more time offline with other people, participating in events like sports teams, plays, religious meetings, study groups, or simply hanging out in person, have dramatically lower risk for depressive symptoms or simply unhappiness than teens who spend time online, whether it be general web use or social media use, which heightens the risk further. The more time spent on a screen, the worse the dangers. Teenagers who spend more than 2 hours a day on a phone are at an increased risk, and that is not an unusually high amount of time for the average teen today. Adolescents are particularly vulnerable to the social side effects of screens. They are lonelier, more unhappy, and more risk-averse than ever before. They are not the only ones suffering. So, what do we lose in the digital age as learners? An alternate version of this question could be, what do we lose in the digital age as students? But I want to emphasize the fact that learning is affected by technology in all stages of life, not just adolescence. After all, we are learners until we die. The internet interrupts our process of knowledge acquisition, whether we are 16 or 61. In order to retain knowledge of something, the brain requires prolonged, repeated exposure. This is why, for example, it is more effective when studying to focus on small batches of flashcards thoroughly, rather than many just once or twice. If something is to be really remembered, it must move in the brain from the working memory to the long-term memory. Our working memory is what we are conscious of at any given moment. It is not cemented in our mind. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is often described as the filing system of our brain. It is the unconscious ocean of knowledge that makes up our memory. Transferring knowledge from the working memory into the long-term memory is an intricate process. Only very small amounts of knowledge can be moved from the former to the latter at once. This knowledge, in the process of being stored, is known as our cognitive load. Nicholas Carr imagines our cognitive load capacity as thimble-sized. A book delivers a steady, slow drip of information that we are able to transfer to the long-term memory via thimble. The internet, which gives us the ability to hop and jump from information source to information source at lightning speed, is a veritable fire hose in comparison. Our information-carrying thimble is quickly overwhelmed, and the subsequent information that we do manage to store is not cohesive. Instead of a rich understanding of a topic, we are left with shallow fragments of knowledge. Under the proper learning conditions, we can grow a tremendous garden of long-term knowledge, which we can draw upon to form complex understandings of the world. That garden cannot be grown if our working minds are assaulted with a barrage of distraction. So, why is your phone in a box? In many educational institutions today, the internet is the primary location of work and research. This, as we've addressed, is detrimental to the acquisition of deep knowledge. Another semi-universal aspect of classrooms today, phones lying on desks. Even if they're not being checked, they pose a threat to that sensitive process of learning. The more things the brain tries to focus on at once, the less information will survive the treacherous journey from working to long-term memory. A smartphone that is in sight, whether upside down or right side up, is a major distraction. Though we are not aware of it, we are spending mental energy on the act of not picking it up, yet another detriment to the quality of our already endangered focus. With all of that in mind, I felt confident going into my foundational learning presentation, a smaller presentation in midwinter when seniors demonstrate what they've learned so far. My foundational learning presentation was somewhat of a reality check for me. I was given strong constructive criticism, which I tried very hard to absorb. First, it was to present science in a less biased way, presenting facts and judgments as separate entities. Second was to consider the reversal of my essential question, and so I asked, what do we gain in the digital age? This, of course, could be another senior seminar project and another essential question. There are certainly a few prominent examples I can mention. Safety in true emergency situations, assistive technology that improves the life of those with disabilities, and equalization of access to financial information. I could go on. I'm not against these things by any means, and I'm not trying to preach for total abstinence from the digital world. I hope, rather, to instill an understanding of the universal benefits to striving for moderation in our relationship to tech. A lot of things in this process, for me, have been trying to understand what that balance and moderation can look like. That's the area where having human mentorship can be profoundly helpful, because balance is a largely unquantifiable concept, better understood through discussion with a knowledgeable person. That being said, I struggled to find a mentorship that made sense for my topic. Initially, I hoped to learn from a professor and therapist who runs an internet addiction clinic in West Hartford, but was ghosted. Then, in need of a declared mentor, I asked Watkinson's own Mr. Cothey to act as my mentor, because he and I had had a number of fruitful and thought-provoking discussions on the subject. Honestly, I feel that I really wasted the opportunity to work and think more closely about this topic with Mr. Cothey, mostly due to the fact that I developed a sort of unofficial mentorship outside of school with an anti-tech author who lives in West Hartford named Dan Pope. Dan is an eccentric, fascinating, and opinionated man who is not here because he is nocturnal and wakes up at 4 p.m. every afternoon. I feel lucky to have worked with him, but instead of narrowing my focus and shifting gears towards the creation of a product, my unofficial mentorship with Dan expanded my hopes for the project, which was both a blessing and a curse in the end. During our experiential learning weeks, 2 weeks in February, when we get the chance to explore our topics off campus, I met extensively with Dan. We discussed creativity, smartphone dependency, and the importance of boredom, as well as a slew of other themes that appear in my final product. But during the experiential learning weeks, this product seemed a distant, foggy issue for a future me. When I returned to school after the release weeks drew to a close, I felt invigorated by the new knowledge and hours of interview footage I had on cassette that I now carried. My product plans, though, now felt too narrow, and I was suddenly back on the drawing board with time running out. Initially, I wanted my product to attempt to answer my essential question explicitly. I was going to create a manifesto. This was a naive idea, I realize now, as the more I've researched and learned, the less I feel this question has a concrete answer that should be told directly to another person. My plan shifted. I was to create a series of academic essays about the topic, but this felt too sterile, and I lacked motivation. I realized that I was craving a creative outlet. And so, the Analogium was born. Its title comes from the word analog, which means non-digital, and non-digital this magazine truly is. I created it entirely by hand, beginning with drafts of writing and an assembly during which I used a typewriter. I wasn't sure at first that it was the most logical choice for attempting to demonstrate mastery of my subject, the stated senior seminar goal for our products. It wasn't until I began the creation of the magazine but I realized it demonstrated a different sort of success. That instead of answering my question explicitly, it answered it in the process by which it was made. A process which was slow, and in some ways a spiritual experience for me. As Robert M. Pirsig suggests in his phenomenal road novel / philosophical dissertation, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, there is a great existential woe among modern mankind due to our separation from the essential process of the creation of things. Now, that's a topic for a whole other presentation, but I believe a part of it also applies here. Pirsig suggests this disconnect between creation and consumption leads to an alienation from the understanding of true quality in life. I felt as I created the analogian that I was bridging this gap for the first time, that perhaps quality could somehow be dependent upon humanity. I hope you're all able to register the human passion and labor that went into the creation of this magazine. It was a wonderfully laborious project. Using a typewriter extendedly is fascinating. You watch the physical stamps press letters into the ribbon of ink and onto the page. It's slow and it's messy, and I loved it all the more for that. That being said, it was not always an easy process to mesh with the requirements of this senior seminar project. The basic requirements like slideshows and websites were difficult to fulfill while maintaining what I considered to be the integrity of my goals. I was tempted many times by the allure of the convenience of the digital world, but for the most part I stood fast. I hand-typed my website on the typewriter and scanned it in, and obviously I chose not to go the route of the slideshow. But there were still moments where it was difficult. As the deadline for our products drew near, I began to rush to finish the graphic design elements of the magazine, the thing which I had the least experience with. I was having an unreasonable amount of trouble designing bubble letters. In a fit of frustration, I Googled zines from the 70s and attempted to trace the letter style onto my page. The tracings looked awful. They were pale imitations of the real thing, and I felt completely demoralized. I closed my laptop and was convinced that I was incapable of creating good bubble letters like those, or even mimics. But after a brief walk outside, I returned and tried creating my own font from imagination. It flowed naturally, and it felt so much more rewarding. I truly believe the crutch of the web has brought us to a point where we believe we are incapable of success without external consultation, when often we have the ability, and exercising it independently is much more rewarding. Whenever I felt tempted to fall back on the crutch of the internet, I remembered a quote by my favorite singer and poet, Bob Dylan. People seldom do what they believe. They do what is convenient, then repent. So, what do we lose in the digital age? The answer is a lot. But the project with this focus by spring was depressing me. It made me blue to think about the prospect of my entire life existing in the digital world. But this wasn't right. This wasn't what I wanted to dwell on. And so internally, I began to think of my question in the inverse form. What can we gain from analog living? We gain a lot. Without phones filling every spare moment of the day, we are left with time alone with our thoughts, which leaves us more grounded, introspective people. We learn better and deeper, and focus becomes rewarding. We are more connected with others. In the spare moments of life, instead of looking down, we talk to those around us. We sleep better, we're happier, but don't take my word for it. Try leaving your phone at home or in your bag next time you go for a walk, see friends, or read a book. See how it feels, and then write me a letter about it. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Questions from the panel?
So, towards the beginning, and you mentioned it throughout, you noted about how or at least you hinted that technology has kind of destroyed our social ability. And I have a question, if you think that perhaps the advancements of technology have, let me figure out how to phrase this, because I've noticed a trend, and I have done a couple of labs studying this actually in psychology, where on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, we often like or are attracted to people interacting with each other. On TikTok, we'll see a video of people laughing together and making jokes, and we'll like that. On Instagram, we see people partying together, and we like that. And then we also have, followers and this many likes and this many friends on Twitter, even if we don't even know those people. And there's this aspect of a false sense of social community through the internet, even if you don't even know those people. Do you think that that is because we as humans reach out for social interaction and we have been trained to do it through social media, or do you think social media has caused us to have social anxiety and we hide behind it for social interactions?
Got all that?
And so, I do believe, and I want to claim to know science, I don't know, but I do believe that we are inherently social species. We seek connection, partly originally for survival. It was easier to survive in groups than it would be as a lone person. But I think that social media has sort of taken that natural human instinct and twisted it to be something that's damaging to us. So I think that the desire exists before social media. Social media then kind of gives us a false sense of fulfilling the desire. Well, it actually makes us devoid of the real connection that we as a species are built to want. So we think that we can fill it by looking at this stuff, but really it's sort of taking us further away from the real thing.
Congratulations, well done. I just wanted to ask about your choice of shifting from the more prescriptive manifesto format to a creative, artistic format. And I was really intrigued by that aspect of your presentation. I also want to hear a little bit more about what it suggests about your understanding of the problem, and maybe how you approach this problem.
Yeah, I think that wasn't a good way to go about it, because I think the way to think about this is not to turn to a person and have them tell you what to do. I don't think there's one way that we should live with technology. I think for every person it might look a little different. What's a healthy balance? And so I felt that I almost didn't have the right to say, do this and this and this, and then you'll be okay. I think that instead presenting a different way of life and saying, consider this and see if it might be something you want to adopt into your daily life. I don't know, I think that's a better thing to do.
Hi. So, when you think about your approach to this and learning, what takeaways did you get from that as to how we might be able to learn better using these kinds of ideas?
It was actually a really interesting process, because in the fall when I started, I was doing the kind of skimming research that I talk about. I was Googling 1 billion articles and compiling them into documents and reading them all very quickly. And I had this sort of very helter-skelter understanding of my own topic. But as the year went on and I started to absorb those readings by returning to them and sitting with them, I started to realize sort of the futility of my initial approach to the project. And so in the winter and spring, I spent more time slowly poring over books about this subject. And I feel that only then did I really begin to understand my topic. So I think that sort of my own journey parallels my realizations about this subject. And I hope in the future to continue to learn in a deeper, slower way.
So I asked this question, I assure you, out of real genuine curiosity, because it's just something I've been mulling over as you've been talking, rather than any kind of criticism. So do you think without technology, a presentation becomes a speech?
This is one of the points that I promise this will connect.
No,
but in the early 2000s, when hyperlink technology in the 90s was becoming prevalent, the idea was when you read a book, you're forced to listen to just one person's perspective,
Right.
and that's all you can absorb. And now with hyperlinks, you'll be able to go and verify one person's perceptions with 5 other qualified people's perceptions. And this ultimately proved to not be positive for the learning process because it encouraged the kind of skimming, and because every time you see a link, when you read, your brain has to stop for a moment and decide whether it wants to click on it. So it's another sort of splintering. And so in that way, I think that without a big slideshow where I can show you the charts, it makes it seem more like a speech. But I think that in some ways it might ultimately be more rewarding for the same reason that it's better to read something straight through without the hyperlinks, because then you can sort of independently go and verify any of this afterwards, but the direct process isn't.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So, I think some would say that the one benefit of presenting on a screen, right, is that you can have screenshots and you can have all I want to do is read what's up here, right? What do you think of that? I mean, do you think that, are you satisfied with the fact that, there's a lot of teasers up here, whereas maybe you could have shown more, I mean, I understand that's ultimately all in here, but it looks like there's drafts and stuff like that. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, there definitely would have been pros to using a
Yeah.
slideshow. I think it just, for me, it felt like when I did the equation in my head, it
Sure.
ended up being more cons. But I think that everyone should just be making those equations and thinking about it in that way. And for some people, it'll end up with a different result, but it's a more critical process.
Yeah, we've spoken about this in CAP before, but for the benefit of the rest of the audience, I kind of have 2 questions. It's a 2-parter. Were you, previous to going to Germany and realizing the other style of life you could live with technology and your relationship to it, were you what someone would call a typical teenager? And then also, could you explain a little bit more of how, specifically with the social aspect and your general day-to-day life and how you get through it, since one of the arguments for why technology is good is because it makes things more accessible and such. Could you explain how your life has benefited and or changed from going to the less digitalized version?
Yeah, so I was a pretty typical teenager. I mean, I didn't get a phone until freshman year, which is a little later than some people, due to my parents' convictions on the subject. But I used a lot, TikTok, Instagram, all that, texting, group chat, a lot of texting. So I wouldn't say I was one of those people where, you couldn't reach me, or I was off of it. It was always on me. And that was part of the reason that I had both a flip phone and a smartphone for a year, because I couldn't quite sever myself from the idea of, if I don't have this phone, I will be left out. I will not be part of the circle, the social stratosphere, the goings-on of people my age. And that was hard for me to take that step. But once I did, I realized you're not walking down the street thinking, God, I wonder what's happening on Instagram. I wonder what is happening on TikTok. I wonder what people are texting about in group chats right now. It just sort of fades away, and life becomes a little quieter. And for me, I liked that a lot better.
I will follow up. So you said that it was a difficult change to make. Was it difficult because of the emotional attachment or the actual physical attachment where, like in CAP one day you mentioned that you use a map in your car instead of like Google Maps. Thank you. Google Maps. Was it a literal difficult time switching, or just the emotional attachment to like FOMO?
There are some technical aspects to to like just the logistics of living without a smartphone is that a lot of the world has started been built for smartphone users. So, you know, your corner store is not going to sell maps. And if you walk in and ask to buy a map of the area, they look at you like you're a little bit crazy. They say, "Oh, did you lose your phone?" But what I've discovered is there are alternative ways to go about things. And I've gotten lost in New York City walking around quite a few times. And I've stopped and talked to people and asked for advice, and I've met some very interesting people. And I've also just sort of accepted getting lost. So it has required some logistical adjustments to the way I operate from day to day. But it's not impossible. It really isn't. I thought it would be. I thought I would be like it anyway.
Let's open it to the rest
Yeah,
of the
I'm
group.
done.
You spoke about the isolation that technology has created between all of its users, whether that was what its like spoken intention is or not. Have you experienced any isolation yourself, just being this analog kid in a digital world now?
There are certain things that are difficult, like if everyone else who's texting you has a smartphone and you have a flip phone, they will send you very long texts, and you'll be expected to reciprocate with a message of equal birth. It's not possible. It's very difficult to type. So that is sometimes people will send me long things, but then I just call them. And so I think, you know, I have good friends, and I haven't found it. I found that I'm closer, I think, to my friends than I was before, because when I'm with them, I'm really with them. So I think that it has the potential to be isolating if you're still trying to operate on a basic level within the technologies of today, because you won't be able to keep up, but you discover sort of other ways to connect, and they're much more fulfilling.
During your non-tech journey here, have you had any other converts? Or converted anyone else?
I was just gonna ask the same thing. You took my question.
Right.
Logan Gottesman and
Uh-huh.
Nathaniel Kinsley are both flip phone users.
Nice.
It's been fun. I had one friend outside of school who tried, and he couldn't do it. It lasted about 2 weeks. Yeah.
So I mean, this is fascinating. You did a wonderful job. Congratulations. It's something that I think about a lot as a former young person and a current teacher and teaching like civics class. I wonder about, you know, you mentioned that you don't want to tell people what to do, but I want to put you on the spot a little bit, and because what I'm curious about is I personally feel like there is some level of responsibility here from adults towards kids, at least. You know, if we're going to sort of make those distinctions, like we certainly don't. As adults, we don't just let kids eat ice cream for every meal and nothing but candy. And like my question, I guess, is what are you hoping to maybe see at policy level, whether it's government, community, organization, parents, like what is the responsibility here of the adults in society to deal with more, not so much the technology piece. For me, it's more about the social media piece, because I don't see that really much as a learning tool. So what is to be done? Because it seems like the information is pretty overwhelming that this is not good for you.
If it was up to me, there wouldn't be phones in high school or under. I think that they're socially detrimental. You know, I think that they prevent people from making friendships they might have forged otherwise, because when things get awkward, you just look at the phone. And so I think, I don't know much about how policy works in public schools, private schools, but I think it would be terrific to see phones start to leave school campuses, or at least to leave classrooms and stay in book bags. But it's hard because the same technology that allows us to use things that might be very beneficial in the classroom holds the potential to have these negative things on it. And unless maybe some technological inventor comes along and creates things that could separate them, it's very tricky. But yeah, there's like a middle school in Connecticut that I think just this past weekend banned smartphones, and I would love to see that happen at more places.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the Overton window's shifting a little bit right now.
I hope if it was up to me, 50 years from now, smartphones would be like cigarettes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
No, incredible work. I'm curious about your mentor. Dan, what would you say?
You just walked
That
in.
well, then this may be even more interesting, I suppose. Given the nature of your question, how were you connected? And also, it seems like you guys, I'm sure, agreed on many topics, but were there any that you disagreed on?
Yeah, so he's a writer, and so is my dad, and so they had met back in the 2000s or 90s. And so I had known him as a kid, because he would give me boxes of books to read. And I would say we disagree over certain things. He is not a fan of the flip phone. He thinks it's too much. He thinks if a phone travels with, and I don't want to take words out of his mouth, but he was, get that thing away from me. But he thinks that if a phone travels with you, it's going to disrupt creative thought. I think that to an extent, we live in a society where unless you really, really want to be a hermit in the woods, you do need to be contactable in certain ways.
I have a similar question to Mr. Kroc, but kind of at a different level. When I conceptualize you as an ideocrat, I don't think of you as someone who has like an explicit goal with this kind of research. And obviously you got it, right? But is when you think of other people, how do you want to present these ideas in your life to others? What do you want to do with this? Now that you've done all this, do you want to get everyone in your immediate circle and then everyone branching out until you top of the pyramid down? What do you do?
I mean, that would be exciting. I wrote a story last summer about a college student who starts an anti-tech club group society called the Alonians. It's where I got the idea for the title. And it's really positive. It builds this positive momentum. More people are getting involved in a tech-free life. And then it crashes down. And he burns down the computer lab of his college. Because there is sort of a demise implicit to the creation of the society. And so I think, I don't want to become an embittered person who is going around wanting to blow up computer labs. That's not my hope for the future. So that's part of the reason I also shifted to a more positive lens by the end of this project, because I don't want to become an embittered person. And so, my ultimate dream, I would love to start some sort of tech-free commune and say, you can come here and look at what life is like and then decide if you want that in your own life. That would be the ultimate dream. That would be very fun.
Other questions?
I was just curious, so during a lot of it you discussed like the effects on younger people. What do you think the effects are with phones for older people? Because there's a lot of like the older generations now that are like really on Facebook and things like that. So do you think it has like a lesser effect on them, or it's affecting them just as much as it is teenagers?
I think it is. I don't have the science or the data on that, so anything I say here, take with a grain of salt. I think it is having similar isolating effects, no matter how old you are. I think there's a special concern for adolescents because we're the first generation to have grown up with this while we're still developing minds. And so our relationship to it is going to be a little bit stranger and potentially more dangerous than people who are able to grow up and become adults without it. That being said, I think a lot of older people, the technology's changed so quickly, so people who are really old struggle to use the stuff that has become really enmeshed as requirements. Like you have to do your banking online, you have to do these things online. I think that that's damaging. I think it can be isolating in the same ways. I mean, I know instead of Instagram, it's Facebook, and I've met a couple older people who just sort of spend their days on Facebook. It seems not necessarily fulfilling. But yeah, I think it's sort of universal in that way.
I do have a question, but I just want to say that as your parent, it's been gratifying and sometimes strange to have made these arguments back when you were, to have blathered at you back when you were in your smartphone era, and now find that you've been embracing them, and that's the gratifying part. The strange part is sometimes to find myself on the opposite side of this argument now, and I am just going to tell a little tale out of the family. When I try to take a picture these days, if you and I are on a trip, there's a beautiful vista, and I take out my phone, as I did in the last trip we took, and you say, "Dad, do you ever question that your immediate response is to record this experience on your phone rather than just experience it and let it live and flourish in memory. And you know, that's an interesting moment, you know, for the dad. And when I say, well, I'm taking the picture. But I guess the question that attaches to that is this really an anti-smartphone issue that you're talking about? Because most of the problems that you've documented here have to do with digital distraction and the excessive role of phones in people's lives. But I know you well enough to know that in other areas of your life, there's all this sort of vintage technology. You know, you've got a record player, the manual typewriter, the landline phone. What is that just sort of like cool style stuff that's fun, or is there some way in which these vintage, outmoded technologies relate to the issues, the problems, and the argument you're making here?
I think that goes back to a question of quality, like Robert Piercy's idea of quality, and this is again is a little unfounded in science, but I find that older technology, a typewriter, a rotary phone, there's a sense of permanence to the way by which it was created. It was created to last and to be durable, and it looks cool. But a lot of, you know, the technology of today, phones and I don't know if I can say this with the same matter of factness, but maybe computers as well, are not necessarily created to be lasting things. You know, Apple starts to slow down older iPhones, so that one must buy the new one. It's consumerism, I think, has seeped more into the things we buy than perhaps it was. And maybe that's me just looking at the way typewriters look with a rosy lens. But I do feel that these things are of better quality, and I'm drawn to that.
I really like the way you went from making arguments to making a thing. That's really interesting, and I appreciate that. I didn't fully realize it until this week.
Other questions?
You talked a little bit about adolescence, but I'm wondering what you think about living digitally or in an analog lifestyle at the university level or college. Kind of what would your ideal world look like, and do you think that the way that students are currently, you know, and you talked a little bit about studying, but I guess I'm wondering, you know, you're going to be going off to college soon. What does your ideal, you know, setting look like, and how do you manage kind of being thrust into a world that has to be digital?
Yeah. This is actually a factor that's going to the deliberation of college choice I'm making right now, because one college doesn't use computers in the classroom and the other does. And a lot of what is drawing me to the college that does not use computers is that fact. And so I think, but that's one college out of thousands, and everywhere else you go, you know, the laptop is the mode and the tool. And so when I think about my life, which is almost certainly going to have to at least partly exist on the digital realm, it's how I'll work, it's how, you know, I'll make money probably, you know, it's part of the office today. Is finding a way to use the technology and not feel that the technology is using you. Is to engage with it as the tool that it's designed to be, and not as a time-wasting machine. So I think, you know, as I go into college and go into the eventual, at least partly digital part of my world, that's what I'm going to try to keep in mind.
I think that's a great place to stop. So thank you very much.
Anyone wants to try a typewriter?
Congratulations, Nick. The panel will head out, and everybody else please talk to Nick and enjoy.
Typing class. Ninth grade.
Every time I hear